Welcome to Mrs. Feighery's video number 1 for Chapter 36, The Cold War Begins. The Americans cheered the end of World War II in 1945, but many worried that with the war over, the U.S. would sink back into another Great Depression. Upon the war's end, inflation shot up with the release of the price controls, while the gross national product sank, and labor strikes swept the nation. To get even with labor, Congress passed the TaftHartley Act, which outlawed closed shops, closed meaning closed to non-union members. They made unions liable for damages that resulted from jurisdictional disputes among themselves, and required that union leaders take non-communist oaths. This is the opposite of the Wagner Act passed during the New Deal, and this new act was like a strike against the labor unions. Labor tried to organize in the South and West during this time period with Operation Dixie, but this proved frustrating and largely unsuccessful. To forestall an economic downturn, the Democratic administration sold war factories and other government installations to private businesses cheaply. Congress passed the Employment Act of 1946, which made it government policy to promote maximum employment, production, and purchasing power. It also created the Council of Economic Advisors to provide the president with data to make that policy a reality. It also passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known as the GI Bill of Rights, which allowed all servicemen to have free college education once they returned from war. The passage of the GI Bill was partially motivated by the fear that the labor markets could not absorb millions of discharged veterans. A long economic boom begins and lasts from 1950 to the 70s. In the late 1940s and into the 1960s, the economy began to boom tremendously, and folks who had felt the sting of the Great Depression now wanted to bathe in the new prosperity. The middle class more than doubled, while people now wanted 2 cars in every garage, and over 90% of American families owned a television. Women were the primary beneficiaries of the post-war economy, their numbers growing in the American workforce while giving up their former roles as housewives. Even though this new affluence did not touch everyone, it did touch many. Post-war prosperity was fueled by several factors, including the war itself, that forced America to produce more than it had ever imagined. However, much of the prosperity of the 50s and the 60s rested on colossal military projects. Massive appropriations for the Korean War, defense spending, industries like aerospace, plastics, and electronics, and research and development all were some examples of these projects. R&D, or research and development, became an entirely new industry. Cheap energy fueled a long economic boom which lasted into the 1970s and increased the popularity of automobiles, grids of electric cables that carried the power of oil, gas, coal, and falling water into homes and factories alike. Workers upped their productivity tremendously, as did farmers, due to new technology and fertilizers. In fact, farming populations shrank while production soared as a result of these new technologies. With so many people on the move, families were being strained. Combined with the baby boom, this explained the success of Dr. Benjamin Spock's book, The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care. Immigration also led to the growth of a 15-state region in the southern half of the United States to become known as the Sun Belt, which dramatically increased in population during this time period. In fact, in the 1950s, California overtook New York as the most populous state. Immigrants came to the Sun Belt for more opportunities, such as in California's electronics industry and the aerospace complexes of Texas and Florida. Federal dollars poured into the Sun Belt, some $125 million, and political power grew there as well, as ever since 1964, every U.S. president has come from that region. Sunbelters were redrawing the political map, taking the economic and political power out of the North and the Northeast. Whites in cities fled to the suburbs, encouraged by home loan guarantees by federal agencies such as the Federal Housing Authority and the Veterans Administration. These loan guarantees made it cheaper to live in the suburbs than in cramped city apartments. By 1960, 1 out of every 4 Americans lived in the suburbs. Government-built highways aided the move to the suburbs, as did tax deductions for interest payments on home mortgages. Innovators like the Levitt brothers, with their monotonous but cheap housing plans, built thousands of houses in projects like Levittown. The white flight left the cities full of the poor and African Americans. Federal agencies aggravated this by often refusing to make loans to blacks due to the perceived risk factor involved with this. This is the works cited page. The images used in this presentation are taken from the public domain.